Hello, my name is Gail Ray, and I'd like to welcome you to the Professional Development Series sponsored by the National Dissemination Center at The Ohio State University in conjunction with the Ohio Department of Education and the Ohio State University chapter of Omicron Tau Theta. Today's session is presented by Susie Rutkowski and Erin Riehle. Susie is the Director of Disability Education for Great Oaks Institute of Technology and Career Development in Cincinnati. Susie has been a teacher for multi-handicapped children and has been a job placement coordinator for students and graduates with disabilities. In Susie's current position, she gives leadership and support to 50 staff members who serves youth and adults with disabilities. She is co-director of SEARCH, S-E-A-R-C-H, a unique collaboration between healthcare and education. The project works to create training and employment opportunities for people with significant barriers to employment. Our second presenter of the day will be Erin Riehle. Erin is the Director of Disability Services for Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, and is the co-director of Project SEARCH along with Susie. Susie and Erin will be discussing best practices for adolescents with disabilities. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Susie Rutkowski.
Thanks, Gail. We're really very excited to be here. As you can see, the name of our presentation is My Daughter Probably Won't Get a Football Scholarship, Now What Do We Do? It may seem like a very tongue-in-cheek title for this, but it's also true. We spend lots of time chatting with families and with educators about the options and alternatives they might have if indeed their student may not feel like they can go on to some kind of post-secondary opportunities. So we're going to spend some time talking today about alternatives, but also some best practices that are out there and what's been identified as some real data, both locally, statewide, and nationally. We will actually read most of our slides. We hope that people with disabilities are tuning into this as well, and for the benefit of those that might have visual impairments, we will be reading most of our slides. Erin Riehle is going to start off and going to go through about the first half of the presentation by giving some career development background for kids with disabilities, some vocational outcomes, and some medical background. Thanks, Erin.
Hello, my name is Erin Riehle, and thanks Susie and Gail. And I'm going to start off by giving some developmental data and also some information about special education in general, kind of setting the stage for Susie to talk about the best practices that exist and are known. We also call this talk vocational preparation using all available training. And there are many options out there that folks do not seem to know about or do not consider as viable options. Scott Adams said, "I figured that if you worked hard and you were smart, you could get promoted. It wasn't until I was well into it when I realized that you also had to be tall and have good hair." And we put this up there kind of as the beginning of our talk because it is absolutely true. We know that in the United States there are 3 indicators of kind of vocational anthropometrics. When you grow up, your job and your salary are primarily based on 3 things: your weight, your height, and your gender. In fact, one of the latest statistics said that for every inch of height in your job, that's worth about $600 per year to you in salary. So if height and good hair and all of these things are so important to those of us without a disability, then you can imagine what a double whammy it must be to be a person with a disability and have to worry about that on top of height and good hair. Employment and disability statistics right now, and actually this is as low as most of you have probably figured out. The U.S. unemployment rate about a month ago was 4.7%. I do not know what it is today. I know it's higher than that. But it doesn't begin to touch the disability unemployment rate, which is 67% and also probably climbing, again as a result of September 11th. It's interesting, though, we have all of these people, and what we know is that given the entire population of people with disabilities, it's not that they did not want to work, it's that they did not have the opportunities. And Mark Gold said in 1975, but it's still very applicable. He said, low expectancy on the part of society is the single most critical deterrent to programs for persons with severe disability. They did a study and found that of all of the millions of people with disabilities in the United States today, approximately only 117,000 are truly unable to work. Everybody else is probably able to work in some capacity. It's that they have not yet been linked or did not know of those opportunities. And it really is low expectancy, and not only on the part of society in terms of general society, but parents, teachers, physicians, nurses, people who come into daily contact with people with disabilities. We took a look at some vocational outcomes for some specific diagnoses, just to make it a little more real. If you have cerebral palsy in the United States today, your likelihood of employment is only 28 to 35%. If you have myelodysplasia or spina bifida, your likelihood of employment is 25 to 74%. It is higher likelihood, lower your lesion. If you have pediatric traumatic brain injury, your likelihood of employment is only 20 to 30%. It's greater the older you are at time of injury. If you're very young at time of injury, it's 20 or less. Very poor numbers. So this kind of, you can look at people you know who have these diagnoses, and you can know that it's very difficult for some of these families to consider employment options or educational options, and some of them aren't there. There are some predictors of vocational outcome for cerebral palsy. And actually, these are predictors for all three of these groups. I chose the ones for cerebral palsy. And there's about 10 of them. It's severity of physical disability, mobility, self-care, speech intelligibility, cognitive function, adequacy of the individual, availability of community resources, which include counseling, training, jobs, supported employment, assistive technology. Now, these are some of the indicators. But on the next slide, I'm going to show you the three indicators, the three predictors of vocational outcome, which have the greatest impact on whether or not they will work. And it's none of the things that you saw on the previous slide, but the three predictors that have the greatest impact on individuals with disabilities are the history of their work experience in school, the number of years in school. For an adolescent with a disability or chronic illness, the number of years in school is a greater indicator of their lifelong achievement than their IQ. That's a stunning statistic, and it's one that's not taken into consideration as often as it should be. And the last of the three most important is certainly parental attitude in the early years of life. And kind of to build on that parental attitude, we wanted to go through some of the career development stages for people with disabilities. These are from Hershenson, well-known theorist. And he lists 4 stages: preschool, elementary school, secondary school, and post-secondary. If you look at preschool, which is stage 1, and you look at career development for persons with disabilities, although our talk is specifically focused on transition for adolescents, we would be totally remiss if we did not talk about the things that are very important early in life. And so we added these slides. But when you're in preschool and you're an individual with a disability, it is when you develop your first orientation to work, whether or not you're a person with a disability. We all do. It's when you develop your basic self-concept and your basic intellectual and skills development. There was a study done, and I can't quote it, I can't remember the author, but they found that if you are a child with a disability, in our society, even though most individuals with disabilities are asked by the time they're 3 what they want to be when they grow up, that rarely does a person, even a family member, ask a child with a disability what they want to be before the age of 3 or even after. Physicians don't ask, teachers don't ask, parents don't ask. It's partly embarrassment, it's guilt, it's many of those factors, but people in general are not asking children with disabilities what they want to be when they grow up and not setting that basic orientation to work. In elementary school, it's when you develop your self-concept as a student worker and you begin to develop pre-vocational skills. It is the key time for chores. It's when most of us clear the table, do the dishes, empty the trash, and all too often we hear that children in this age who have disabilities are kind of exempted from those chores. Parents will have a sibling do the chores for them, or the parents will do them themselves, but too often parents and everyone in that circle, the circle of that child's life, let them out of those responsibilities instead of holding them accountable. And this is one of the key things that can be done that aids long-term educational and vocational development. Every child with a disability, regardless of how significant, needs to be given a chore list, just like every other sibling in the family. And those, of course, can be creative, and you can do accommodations and adaptations. You know, if you have someone with severe cerebral palsy, and they have very little limb coordination, but they're able to do something on the computer, maybe you put them in charge of menu development for your family for the week. Maybe they're in charge of coming up with a grocery list. So you can adapt those chores, but there needs to be some expectation that everyone in your family plays a valuable role and can contribute to the working of your family. They have to have that in order to build a mindset as a valuable contributor and worker. Secondary school is a time of personal and social coping, vocational exploration and tryout. It is for all of us, and many of us work during high school. Some of us even start as early as 14. And yet it's very true, partly because of funding, but for a variety of reasons. It is very difficult as an adolescent with a disability or chronic illness to have that vocational exploration or tryout during high school. It's a critical piece that's missing, and I actually don't have a solution. What I know, though, is that there need to be more opportunities there for adolescents at this period of time. And then post-secondary. By post-secondary age, you really are at a time when you should have a crystallized, implemented choice, and you should be able to be moving on to subsequent choice modification and dealing with issues of being a worker with a disability. Too often with kids with disabilities, what we find is that by the time they get to post-secondary age, they're still on stage 1 because they've not moved through those in a developmental pattern. Does that make sense? And there are lots of barriers to career preparation for youth with disabilities. We know that. Ed Nelson said in the Journal of Adolescent Healthcare that some of the barriers are categorization of special education students, lack of access to and availability of existing job training programs, insufficient employment opportunity, lack of self-advocacy skills, the need to improve and disseminate procedures for secondary special education, and inadequate coordination among service providers. I want to give you a little bit of background information about both special education and special education students at risk. It kind of builds to Susie's talk on what we believe are some of the best practices. Overall, for the past 10 years, the U.S. Department of Ed says that the number of students served under IDEA has increased 29.42%. The largest percentage increases by age group were for students ages 12 through 17, so they're in the secondary. The largest increase among disability categories was in other health impairments, which grew 279%, almost 300%. So there's been a huge growth in this area of other health impairments. It is going to need to be addressed. I'm not sure that it has been yet because it's an evolving population. If you look at special ed dropouts and lost students, special ed dropouts and lost students outnumber graduates. There are more students with disabilities leaving special ed services prematurely in each year from 1996 to 1998 than graduated with a high school diploma. 27% graduated with a diploma, that's all. Almost 14% returned to regular education programs for a variety of reasons. 17.3% dropped out, and about 13% left special education untracked. We do not know why, but they were no longer part of that population. The percentages of students with disabilities graduating from high school were highest for youth with speech and language impairments, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairments. They were lowest for students with autism and multiple disabilities. And this is 1996-1997 data. If you look at traditional special education, you most often think of segregated classes within schools, although most now are moving to an inclusion model. And we would argue, and this is probably quite a controversial topic, but that there are pros and cons of inclusion in relationship to employment preparation. And it's really, you're at risk of looking at an all-academic program or an all-functional program. Part of what we talk about in our best practices is that we believe the best practice, given all the data that's out there, is a strong mix of academic and functional, but that an adolescent with a significant disability needs to have both, that one is not going to be sufficient. And so we do believe you have to take advantage of all school programs in preparation for work. For a growing number of students with disabilities, special ed is not preparing them for the increasingly rigorous graduation requirements and career skills that are based on problem-solving, collaboration, and technology. The statistics that came out of US DOE last year showed that, in fact, English and math scores for students with disabilities in regular classrooms did not increase. Now, the English and math scores for the students without disabilities in those classrooms did increase, probably as a function related to the fact that teachers were taking a more inclusive look at how students were being educated. What did increase for the students with disabilities was maturity, socialization, and developmental skills. Just real briefly, I want to talk about special education students at risk. What we know is that almost 28% of students in special education who are suspended or expelled had emotional disturbance, while less than 9% of all students in special education had emotional disturbance. Males were more likely than females to be suspended or expelled, and the gender discrepancy was greater among students with disabilities. If we don't get some of these folks into the correct program, and we rely strictly on an academic program or a functional program without looking at a nice blend, then we increase this risk of dropout, and then we have more folks who are being suspended or ending up in trouble. The number of students with disabilities in correctional facilities has risen at over twice the rate of the overall special education population. From 1992 to 1997, the number of students ages 6 to 21 with disabilities increased 13%, while the number in correctional facilities increased 28%. They're dropping out, and unfortunately they're going to correctional institutes, and I don't think that's the path that we would choose. Youth with disabilities who dropped out of school were 5.9 times more likely than other students to be arrested. And students with disabilities are suspended and expelled at rates that exceed their proportion in the school population. More than 1 in 3 youths who enter correctional facilities have previously received special education services. And again, youth with emotional disturbances make up the majority of those incarcerated. 42 to 45% of all the youth who are incarcerated in the United States have a learning disability. And those are astonishing numbers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Susie, who's going to move on with best practices.
Thanks. Erin and I always tease, if you go back to that one slide where Scott Adams is talking about, having good hair, and then the height, weight, and gender, that she makes lots more money than I do because she's so much taller. All the statistics and all the data that we just read to you really does support the fact that kids need to stay in school, that we need to find alternative ways and practices for them to get the most out of what's available in school, and that we need to take a look at what packages almost that we can put together for students so that they will be successful when they stay in school. So we're going to look at some more supporting data, talk for a few minutes about visioning, spend quite a few slides on what deferred graduation is and what it means, and then talk about options in career and technical education. Some more data says, this is from 1997, students with disabilities are less likely to drop out of school and more likely to be competitively employed after high school if they receive adequate vocational education classes in high schools. Bob Baer, in 1999, did some research with 220 recent high school graduates, and what he found was that students with disabilities who completed a vocational training program are 9 times more likely to report being employed than those who did not. He also found that students who received transition support services were 2.3% more likely to be employed. This is some data from our own Ohio Division of Career and Technical Education. In the school year collected from 1998 to 1999, they reported that 95.3% of all vocational school completers were employed at 1 year post-graduation. Of that same class, 91.2% of them, of the vocational school completers with disabilities, were employed at 1 year post-graduation. So we're very proud of those statistics of kids with disabilities that completed a career and technical program. This is a long quote, but it says, parents who understand their children's rights and participate in securing those rights will have greater success than unprepared, uninformed, or uninvolved parents in securing an appropriate education for their children. However, behavior of school personnel may inhibit parent involvement. Salambier and Fernie reported the following factors that inhibit parent participation. School personnel who did not appear to listen to parents, failed to attend meetings, left meetings early, lacked relevant information, failed to request parent input, did not express a clear purpose for the meeting, or used overly technical language. So what's that saying to us is that, sure, the kids that are going to be more successful are those who have parent involvement. That should be kind of a no-brainer to us. But then how do we as professionals, impact the success of parents wanting to and staying involved with their child through all the years that they're in school? There's also been a lot of data that says that parents sort of drop off their interest as children get older, no matter if their kid has a disability or not. But how much can we encourage parents to stay involved by our own behavior, by our own visioning, by our own language, by our own even attention to parents, by keeping them at the table, so to speak. It's our responsibility. OSEP, or the Office of Special Education and Programs, has found that requirements with the strongest link to improved educational results for students with disabilities include those addressing, 1, involvement and progress of students with disabilities in the full range of curricula and programs available to non-disabled children, including general curriculum and vocational education and work experience programs. 2, the provision of transition services to enable students with disabilities to move effectively from school to post-school independence and achievement. It's interesting that this data exactly mirrors the two pieces of information that Bob Baer found in his local study in Kent State. So what they're finding nationally and what we're finding in Ohio are the very same two things, that students need to be involved in career technical programs to be successful, and kids need transition services in order to be employed and to be successful post-graduation. Before I go on to this deferred graduation, I'm going to talk just for a minute about visioning. For those of you who work with students on IEPs every day in and day out, visioning should be part of the IEP process. And often it's something that we overlook because of time. And you and I have been involved in enough IEP meetings to know that there's so much to do in those meetings, it's hard to fit in the visioning piece. But visioning should occur from the very first IEP that you ever have with a child. And as Erin said, back in the beginning when kids are preschool age, you need to start talking to them about what they want to be when they grow up. That's visioning. That's what do you want to do? It's the very same thing. And so you can start to talk about visioning or career development or a job or what do you want to be when you grow up. Any of those kinds of things when kids are very, very young. And you know what? If you forget to do it at 3, it's okay to start it at 5. And if you forget to do it then, it's okay to start it at 6. Just start it. Start that conversation sometime. If you think about visioning, a couple things are really, really important. 1, be creative. think about everything you have at your fingertips, what is within your own geographic reach and just ability to do within all the resources that you can pull together. 2, be functional. What is it that that kid needs and how am I going to get it? And 3, include all the players. When you looked back at the slide that says what are the barriers to preparation for kids with disabilities, I think one of the barriers said something about lack of coordination of service providers. If we don't get the right people at the table and if we don't get the right people talking to each other early on, then people are either going to end up stepping over themselves or the opposite will happen and the right things won't get done. Every area is different, every school district is different, but usually you still have the same kinds of resources if you just think about what they are and who can provide them and then pull them together. The other key to that is nobody likes to be told at the last minute that, oh, by the way, you're going to be performing this for Joyce. Well, it would be nice if you would have told me last year so I could start thinking about how I was going to provide that for Joyce. And that's often our dilemma in career and technical, that someone else decided that they were going to come to the career and technical school without telling anybody at the career and technical school. So, or someone decided we were going to buy a $500 piece of equipment and, oh, by the way, you were going to pay for it without telling that person who was going to pay for it, so they can start thinking about how they were going to do that. So just bring all the people together at the appropriate times. Take it to us. I'm going to talk about deferred graduation for a minute. Deferred graduation, this is kind of my own definition. It's not out there on the books anywhere, but it's a policy or a procedure of a local school district that allows students with disabilities the opportunity to go through the graduation ceremony when they have earned all the necessary credits for graduation. This practice has also been referred to as social graduation. Very simply, what it's saying is kids with disabilities can stay in school through the year of their 22nd birthday. They don't have to graduate when they're 18. They can keep going to school, getting more programs, getting more education. But many students, because they're 18 and all their friends have gone through the graduation ceremony, they want to do that too. That's only normal that they participate and go through that very, very important time in their life. They walk across the stage, they have a party, they wear the cap and gown, all those good things. But once they accept that diploma, the school can cease their services. So this is an opportunity, once they're allowed to graduate, once they have the credits, they can go through the ceremony, receive a blank diploma or a blank envelope or whatever your school happens to do, and then keep going to school. What usually happens is the diploma is held with the local school district. The student can continue with their education at the local school or the local career and technical school until he or she completes the year of their 22nd birthday. If the educational program is completed before that time and the IEP team decides the student's ready to leave the educational system, the student can accept the diploma and end services from the local school district. If you talk about then, how would I plan for this so that it happens ahead of time? You really can't tell your school district in May 1, that, oh, by the way, May 30th, I want to go through deferred graduation. There needs to be a plan. You need to have some decision making with all the stakeholders, and all the stakeholders means all your IEP team, the principal if that's necessary, the parents, where do you plan to go next year, etc. You need to have a plan to acquire all your necessary credits for graduation. You still have to get all those Carnegie units. You need to decide whether that's going to be in the general and or in the special education track. Are they going to get some academics? Are they going to work on some social skills? Is the plan to gain more maturity by staying in school longer? And then they would participate in the ceremony, and then what comes next? If you have 2 years left, 3 years left, whatever, how are you going to use that time? For those of you that are participating through the webcast, one of the handouts was a blank plan that you can actually fill out at any time with a student on one of your case studies to talk about then how would you plan for that young person. And make sure you work into that plan what are the mandated transition planning services, work experiences, job development, and then linkage to appropriate adult and community services. What can I take advantage of my community? What's out there for this young person that he needs? Why should we do deferred graduation? For students, it allows students who've earned the necessary credits for graduation to participate in the graduation ceremony with their friends. Again, the timing of the ceremony is very important to students and families so that students can walk through graduation with their classmates. Why else? Number two, this option helps families to develop long-range plans that help meet the social, emotional, academic, and vocational preparation needs for the students. Three, there are many resources and services available for students while they are still in a school setting that are not available or are very costly after graduation occurs. And four, even though students with disabilities are chronologically the same age as their peers, frequently they are very behind developmentally. Being able to remain in school would allow students additional time to learn necessary daily living skills, vocational competencies, basic academics, and any other skills necessary to be successful as they transition from school to adult life. Again, here's an opportunity to stay in school when they might be a bit older and go through, let's say, a career and technical program at age 20 and 21 as opposed to 16 and 17. There's a big developmental difference with the kid in terms of maturity-wise for those 3 or 4 years, hopefully being very successful in a setting like a career and technical program, just staying in school a few more years. Students can finish their required credits for graduation and then participate in vocational training programs to gain skills for employment. This can be seen by students with post-secondary experience. There are job placement services available from the vocational school that will benefit the student as he or she transitions from school to work. Again, they could participate in graduation, they could go on to a career and technical program and consider it like a college program. Also, there are different kinds of job placement service available that can be one-on-one with a student with a disability. And different schools call them different things. We call them Option 4 programs. We call them job training coordinators. We call it job placement. But that one-on-one service is available to students at no cost in a career and technical setting, whereas it would cost a lot of money if you went out and bought that privately or through vocational rehab as a result. What are the merits for school districts for a student with a disability to stay in school through deferred graduation? It demonstrates the district's commitment to individualized transition and long-range planning. You do still capture the per pupil cost, so additional revenue would be generated through additional flow-through dollars and or, if you still have units funded or per pupil spending, and you still get the weighted formula also. School personnel can utilize additional time to complete IEP goals and transition goals. And if you have a business advisory council or if you have an advisory council, all of those councils and your local business community supports deferred graduation because it better prepares students for the workforce. Now let's talk for a couple minutes about vocational education or career and technical education for students with disabilities. In 1960, vocational education was mandated as an option for all youth ages 16 and over. Vocational training programs then became an option for students with disabilities. In Ohio, in order to accommodate students with disabilities, we designed a continuum of options. We call those options 1 through 4. And option 1 is students are included in a regular program with monitoring of their IEP. So a student with a disability might be in a business technology program in a career and technical setting could do very well in that program, might have a learning disability, and their IEP would be monitored by someone at the school. Option 2 would be students are included in a regular career and technical program with very minimal support. Again, it might be a student with a learning disability where you had to make a few more modifications or adaptations to their program. Maybe some slight tutoring, maybe extended time for tests. Option 3 would be that students are included in regular programs with major adaptations. For example, a half-day option. So a student would come to a career and technical program for just the lab and then return to his or her home school for the academic portion. And option 4, students would be in specialized programs to meet more individualized needs. Some of those programs might be what we called an option 4 program or a job placement program, where they would have one-on-one support. They would still be in a special education class in a career and technical school, and they would be receiving one-on-one individualized job placement support services so that they could go out into their local community and help get a job and then have job training services on the job. If we are going to look at career and technical programs for kids with disabilities, we always begin with a career assessment. We want to look at what are their skills, what are their aptitudes, what are their academic scores, what are their functional scores, and we use that information to select an appropriate program. I'm going to refer a lot of this to Great Oaks because that's where I'm from, although there are career and technical programs all over. But at Great Oaks, we have about 50 different career and technical programs that we might choose from. And I'm proud to say that we have kids with disabilities in every one of those programs. Does that mean that every kid is appropriate for every one of those 50 programs? Absolutely not. And that's why you need career assessment to try to figure out what is a good match. The decision needs to be made by the IEP team about which is the best match for that student using that career planning information from the assessment. And that's when you can consider things like half-day options, especially if the academics are too rigorous in the career and technical program that you've selected. It's usually a 2-day process, the career assessment, and with a written report that comes back to the IEP team and a conference. The assessment, again, is a tool to be used by that IEP team for career planning purposes. If at the conference that you decide that a regular program is not going to be appropriate for a student with a disability, we also have what we call adapted career and technical programs. These have modified academics. They are designed for kids with more significant disabilities and more involved challenges. We usually have a job coach or a job trainer that is in that program at all times. They also have work experiences where they go out into the community that on a weekly basis so that they are relating what they're learning in the lab out in the community. We often get concerns at an assessment conference when we recommend an adapted career and technical program. The family might say, I don't want my student to be in restaurant. He can do more than a restaurant program. Why do you always recommend that? And what I would want to say back to that family is, yes, he or she may want to do more than have a career in restaurant, but there are many skills and techniques and training opportunities available during that program, during that 2-year time where they're going to gain developmental skills, they're going to gain functional skills, they're going to be out in the community learning customer service skills, being forced to interact with the public. So maybe they're never going to work in a restaurant, but this 2-year period of time gives them additional training to learn the independent skills, mature, and have a skill that they're going to be able to use their whole life. These are just a few examples of what we have at Great Oaks. We have restaurant operations programs, hotel operations programs, and horticulture programs. I'm very proud to say our hotel operations program always has 100% placement. Another option for students with more significant disabilities is transition to work programs. Some people refer to it as option 4 programs. It's an alternative to a career and technical program. Again, students remain at their local high school and participate in their special education programs. They have a job placement specialist who works with the IEP team and the student to develop community jobs. While they're doing that, they're linking the student to other services in the community, such as travel training, Rehab Services Commission, the Board of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities, United Cerebral Palsy, whatever happens to be appropriate for that young person in order to make them successful. Again, that's that coordination of service providers that's very, very important. I'm just going to talk for a few seconds about an example of another high school transition program that we have in Cincinnati. And you could take this example and use it anywhere in your community. This one happens to be with healthcare, with Children's Hospital. It could be in a bank. It could be with a hotel. It could be with an insurance company. The key is, again, to extend experiences in high school, to get the students out there in the community working, to expose them to what is real and available in terms of a work situation. We have a high school transition program at Children's Hospital called Project Search. It's a one-year program designed for students with disabilities who are in their last year of high school. And again, that last year could be when they're 19 or could be when they're 22. The project targets students whose main goal is employment and who will benefit from a career exploration in a healthcare setting. We serve 8 to 12 students every year, ages 18 to 22. They spend their entire school day at Children's Hospital Medical Center. We have a certified instructor on site with additional job coaches who provide supervision and support. And each student rotates through 3 to 4 individualized work experiences during the school year. By the second half of the school year, we expect that they will be placed in a healthcare employment setting, either at Children's or out in the community. We have funding for the teacher from the Department of Career and Technical. Many of our students have gone through deferred graduation. They have to have all their academic credits required for graduations because we don't teach math or science or phys ed. We have a legal written contract between Children's Hospital and Great Oaks. The students carry a small additional liability insurance rider to protect them while they're on the job, and the students receive credit, high school credit, not pay while they're rotating through the work experiences. This is a quote from Stephen Simon in 1998. He said that people with disabilities have the right to choose a path toward education and employment. However, while freedom of choice is given, the right to work is earned. Earning the right to work is dependent upon the student's preparation. I'm going to end with that thought, knowing that, yes, we have the right, we have the obligation to give many, many educational opportunities, but students have to do their part as well to begin to work, and we have to help them prepare to work by offering as many experiences, services, and training programs as possible. Thank you. Now I'm going to go to Becky.
Susie, this question is for you or Erin. At what age is a youngster identified, or the ideal time to identify any and all disabilities so that an individual education plan could be developed and the student could receive needed services? And how is that done?
Kids with disabilities are identified at any time. Many students are identified when they're very young, when they're first starting school. Usually a teacher and or a parent will notice that they're not developing as quickly as most students should through the general curriculum. That doesn't mean, however, that you can't, as a high school teacher, say to a parent or a family or a special education staff person in your building, I think there's something wrong here. I think we need to look at why this young person isn't understanding the concepts I'm teaching, or why is he having so much struggle in school, and then start the process there. And the process is what we call a multi-factored evaluation, where a student goes through a whole battery of tests to determine what kind of a disability they might have. There's also a lot of data out there that says that there is a huge number of kids with chronic illnesses and disabilities that are not receiving special education services. So even though we as educators think we're doing a great job and catching all these kids with disabilities, there are many, many students with either a traumatic brain injury that they might just have received through an accident or whatever, or an illness that is preventing them from being successful in school. And those are also students that we need to start looking at. Why aren't they being successful, and should they be receiving special education services? You want to add anything?
One of our national scholars from New Hampshire, and she would like to know, are the diplomas regular diplomas, or are they modified in some way for the special ed student? And also, is there a state policy about that all schools have to offer it?
I can only speak for Ohio, although Erin and I were just in Florida, and we were talking to somebody from North Carolina, and they were saying that in North Carolina they do give a special diploma to students with disabilities. In Ohio, we do not. They get a regular diploma, the same as any other student would, and have to earn the same kind of credits. Now, they can earn credits through special education classes, an English credit, a math credit, a science credit, but they have to earn the same amount of credits that any other student would. But it sounds like many states do things differently, and so you'd have to check out from New Hampshire what your state policies are.
The policy for deferred graduation is a national mandate. That is not state-based. And in fact, the age varies depending on some states. Kentucky, for example, deferred graduation is a 21-year policy. Michigan happens to be 26, and they're the highest, but it's a national mandate, and the age varies most typically between 21 and 22. And to repeat what Susie said, it's absolutely true. Every state Department of Ed has the option of choosing what their diploma is going to look like and what they're going to require for graduation.
Doug Majors, who's in Oklahoma, and he would like to know, he knows that vocational programs, there are limits to how far a student can complete a competency sequence. So what are your suggestions of how to help parents who may be unrealistic about what their child can do? How do you handle those parents?
Not only handling the parents, sometimes handling the teachers, and I'll say that as a teacher. But hello to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma has awesome career and technical programs. The IEP team should really determine what competencies are going to be achieved in that program. And most career and technical programs have pages and pages of competencies. And most career and technical programs are 2 years long. And because you can convene your IEP team at any time, you really could choose any amount of the competencies to begin with that you felt that the student could achieve. And you can start with some pretty general goals on your IEP in terms of what competencies you would want to work toward. And then you can enlarge that amount of competencies or make those competencies smaller as the student is progressing in the curriculum. I really believe that you can be very individualized and work with your team, and then also start thinking about what jobs are available and what do you want to progress toward in terms of a job, and tailor those competencies so that you make sure that that student is going to be marketable. For instance, if you live in an area where there's lots of dealerships and the kid's in an auto technology program, then you better go out and find out what that dealership is needing for the student to come and work there, so you're also working toward what the employer wants. By about the time the student is 16, 18 years old, that employer needs to be brought into the fold in terms of an IEP team. Even though the employer might not sit on the IEP team, he's still going to be your customer and your stakeholder in a few years, and you want to tailor those competencies to what the labor market for that program is demanding as well. So it's family, it's student, it's teachers, and it's the labor market.
I also think, is this on? I think that one thing that we find is that quite often we'll have parents who come in with very unrealistic goals, and they'll go through an assessment which will come back and say that perhaps their child is not qualified academically to go on to be a state-tested nursing assistant, and yet the parents will want to do that because they believe that's the best choice. And oftentimes it is because, and Susie mentioned this earlier, that they do not want to put their child with a disability into what they see as a stereotypical program, such as horticulture, culinary, landscaping, those types of programs. And what we have found, and we talk to parents about this as young as we possibly can, even back in grade school, but currently in the United States, only 17% of individuals who go to college and graduate with a bachelor's degree actually work in the field for which they trained. So why would we believe it would be any different for our students with significant disabilities who may have to opt to go through a culinary program or a horticulture program? And we need to change the mindset. Instead of looking at as a very negative option or a stereotypical option, look at it instead as a growth option that provides functional skills. And it's just one more ladder on the step, perhaps even to some post-secondary options that the family wouldn't have been able to take part in without those building steps. And so what we try to do sometimes, I think, is to work with families so they don't see those adapted programs as so totally negative.
This is a question from Jerry McMurtry, who's in Idaho, and he said that he wants to know what you think the impact on special ed students and diplomas will be as we implement higher graduation standards.
Wow, that's a hard question. Hi, Jerry from Idaho. I think when you do that, it is kind of a double-edged sword. We want students with disabilities to have higher academic standards as well. They very often can't compete in algebra classes, in geometry classes, in calculus, and some of these other things. We have to be creative in terms of how are we going to provide support services for students to either be successful to some degree in those programs, or let them do half-day options so that they can receive special ed classes in academics back at their home school and then come to the career and technical program just to get the skill portion only. It's a great question, and I don't know that I have all the answers to that, because I think we struggle with it everywhere now, as not only legislators but families and employers want all kids to have higher academics, whereas some students with disabilities cognitively cannot handle those higher academics.
You address job coaches, and I'd like you to share with us how you fund your job coaches, if you collaborate with other agencies, just how it works with Great Oaks.
Okay, thanks, Joyce. We do a number of things to support our job coaches. Job coaches are usually folks with, they can have a degree or they can be a paraprofessional person that works with a young person either in the career technical lab to learn skills or out in the community to learn a job. While they are still in school, we use a limited amount of our Carl Perkins money to fund job coaches. We also ask our affiliate schools to help support a job coach if a student really demonstrates that the only way they're going to be successful in a career and technical program is if they have a one-on-one job coach. And so an affiliate school may help financially support a job coach in the lab in order for him to be successful. We also work with Rehab Services Commission. In most states it might be called Department of Voc Rehab or Bureau of Voc Rehab, and we use some funds while students are still in school to support work experiences out in the community just prior and just after they get a job, to support them initially learning the employment phases of that job. Their regulations have tightened up in the last year, whereas we used to be able to access more, a large pool of dollars for job coaches. Those funds are also shrinking, and so we have to be very, very time efficient with our job coaches. Sometimes we only have about 80 hours on a job to use that job coach, so we need to be as efficient as possible. And then lastly, we can sometimes access job coaches through the Department of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities if a student qualifies for their services, if they have enough of a significant disability to qualify for services. So we've also written some grants to foundation and private corporations to access job coaches, and then we can use them, and we have more flexibility, I guess, to use those job coaches when we use job coaches from funding from a foundation.
This is a question from Doug Majors in Oklahoma. He would like to know, where does the student's potential danger to others come into play when you're talking about vocational programs with heavy equipment, your mechanical type programs?
We hope that before a student comes to a career and technical program that the sending school will share as much information as possible. And if the student has a history of behavior issues or safety issues, then we can address that ahead of time. That doesn't always happen that we get prior knowledge, but if we do get prior knowledge, we can do what we call a functional behavior assessment and write a behavior plan to address those safety concerns, especially if he's had a history of being, like you say, a danger to himself and to others. We have some resources at hand in terms of if they're doing that because they need anger management classes or they need counseling or those kinds of things, we can direct a student to those through support services. If they simply don't have the cognitive ability to understand the safety issues, then we just have to take as much time as possible and repeat and repeat and repeat those initial safety classes before a student is allowed to use any kind of equipment. So it really depends on why is he a danger to himself and others. Is it because of emotional disturbance, behavioral issues, or does he simply not have the ability to understand how to use the equipment? And once we figure out what that is, we can backtrack and do some either support services or lots of preparation. No student, not a kid with a disability or a kid without a disability, cannot utilize any equipment in any program before they pass the safety test. That is the first step in any career and technical program, so it wouldn't be any different for a student with a disability. We would just kind of pool our resources and figure out how we were going to get past that hurdle and why it is that he was having, or she was having, those kind of difficulties.
Erin, could you tell us about some of the training stations at the Children's Hospital? I think you have some unusual sites, and then what else are you doing to help other people start these types of programs?
We have a very extensive program at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. We partnered with Great Oaks about 5 years ago and are just approaching our 5-year anniversary, and we're very proud of that. We actually have about 7 different programs. We run what we call a Voc Ed clinic, and we offer to any patient at Children's Hospital aged 14 to 21 transition services, meaning we'll work with the family to provide long-term educational and vocational planning, and that's been a very successful program. We've also linked with Great Oaks to provide a virtual academy
program which allows any patient with a chronic illness or disability who is at risk of dropping out of school or falling behind the opportunity to make up their classes and yet still remain within their regular school system by taking an Ohio-approved curriculum by way of computer. So we're now using that extensively at the hospital with many of our inpatients. And that's children with conditions such as cystic fibrosis, sickle cell, which certainly qualify as a disability, but we don't often think of because it's hidden. We have a school program where we take, as Susie mentioned, 12 students each year. They have significant disabilities, and they rotate through work sites throughout the hospital. We have replicated, to directly answer your question, we replicated that program at 5 other hospitals currently and are working on several more right now. We have a program at Clinton Memorial Hospital. There's an outreach here at Ohio State University Hospital. We have one in Northern Kentucky at St. Elizabeth's. In Toledo at Flower Hospital. We're working with Toledo Children's. So there are many school programs out there that are really that third stage in our plan. You know, stay in school through the normal age, then go to a vocational school or career and technical school, and then go through a transition program. And our whole goal is to set these hospital programs up as that third step or that transitional program. We talk nationally about all of our programs, and yesterday we were in Amelia Island talking to the National Association of Children's Hospitals and related industries. There's a great interest among hospitals in working more with this population and particularly in partnering with schools. And it's funny, what we find when we talk is that neither entity, neither the hospital nor the career and technical school, thinks of each other as a natural partner. And I think what Susie and I have learned over time is that, in fact, we're about the best partner we could be to each other because hospitals are really a microcosm of the working world. We serve the same population. We get many patients who, because of their illness or chronic or disability, are not receiving special ed because they drop out. So it's been a great partnership for us to come together and provide services. We also have a training program that teaches individuals with disabilities to become health unit coordinators. And we just started an incumbent worker program which provides career advancement. Currently, Children's has about 70 employees with significant disabilities as part of our workforce. We're about 1.5% of our entire workforce. Our goal is about 3%. And we work throughout the state and the United States to encourage hospitals to kind of put their money where their mouth is. You know, if you're a person with a chronic illness or a disability, the likelihood is that you spend a great deal of time in a hospital. And hospitals have provided a great amount of service to you. What they have not done is shown that folks with disabilities can be ably and very productively employed adults. And so we work all over the nation with hospitals who call us to help them set up programs to employ people with disabilities. Does that answer your question, Joyce?
I know you wanted a couple sites that we've used, and we want to make clear that in this program, students don't rotate through the same 4 sites. We try very hard to set up an individual path of rotation sites for each student, and we've used such things as sterilization, dental sterilization. We have used some traditional sites in the cafeteria, but only when students want it. We really try to stay away from that. We have just started last year and this year, when it's appropriate for students, to use what we call patient transporter position so that young people can get some experience with actual patients. They're not giving patient care, but they're transporting them from one place to another. And we're very excited to say that this school year, our first student just got offered a full-time job as a patient transporter, making about $10 an hour as a patient transporter.
I'm going to jump in here on Susie and talk about some of those positions. I think what the hospital has learned that's key to businesses everywhere is that I think our initial tendency, and most hospitals and businesses think of people with disabilities as working either pulling trash or in their cafeteria. And so for the first 3 years of our existence, we did not place a single person in any one of those positions. We went out of our way to show that people with disabilities could work in other fields. And what we have learned, some pretty startling things that I wouldn't have known,
We do all of the stocking in the operating room, in the emergency departments, and on many units in the hospital. We have about 12 people probably who stock in and around Children's Hospital. And I probably initially would have said that was an impossible job because I thought that they needed to know the names of every piece of equipment, what it was called, what it was used for, how it was used. And in fact, what we've learned is that is not at all necessary. They do not need to know the name of a single piece of equipment. That's not necessary to stock. You can recognize by sight. You can have accommodations and adaptations. It's about getting that piece of equipment to the place where it needs to go. And we've actually been able to cut costs dramatically by setting up PAR levels, which our employees with disabilities follow to the letter. The other thing is that working in a hospital, you can do many, many jobs by just counting to either 5 or 10. And you're not required to count much higher than that. And so we can put in place many accommodations and adaptations to make it possible for someone with a cognitive disability to do a job that maybe you wouldn't have known otherwise. I used to, we have a job coach who does a talk, and the first time she did it, she was up here talking about some of the supplies that the students were stocking, and she mispronounced every single word. What I would call cannula, she was calling it cannula, which sounds to me like an Italian pastry. And so I was laughing, but it was a point for me that it didn't matter what you call that or that you know what it is. It's just where does it go and how many do you need. And so hospitals really are service providers, and most everything can be broken down into a pretty simple procedure. As Susie mentioned, at Children's, we have a full dental clinic. It's huge. I think we run about 17 rooms, and we have just one person who acts as our full-time dental sterilization tech. Her name is Annie. Annie happens to be 25 years old, and she has Down syndrome. And so she sterilizes every piece of dental equipment used in our dental lab. We have 3 people, 2 of whom have Down syndrome, who work in our central sterilization department. Now, are they able to sterilize every single tray that goes up to the operating room? Absolutely not. Could they in time? Perhaps. It might take years and years. But they are able, given a limited number of trays, to do those on a daily basis and do those better than just about anybody else can. So currently, if you come to Children's Hospital in Cincinnati and you have a tonsillectomy, ear tubes, you have a laceration, or you just use a general tray, I can guarantee you 100% that those trays have been prepared by a person with a significant disability. They do those trays every day, and I spoke recently to our OR manager who told me that she was delighted when she saw a tray come up with one of those folks' name on it, because she knew that the instrument would be exactly where they needed to be, that it would be well put together, and they were their favorite trays to work with because there were fewer errors. So we really are looking at non-stereotypical roles and making accommodations and adaptations so that people with disabilities can perform those same jobs.
Are those students, is that workplace, or have they been hired by the hospital? One of the scholars asked how many of the students have been hired into actual positions.
That's a good question. And actually, I think last we looked, I think we were at about 80% of our students had been hired, not just at Children's though. Our training program is for healthcare throughout the Tri-County area, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio, preferably though in Hamilton County. So we don't hire every student, but we also have an adult program where we hire people with disabilities. So of the 70 employees at Children's Hospital currently, many of them are students. Some of them also came to us as adults with disabilities. We have 13 who currently work as couriers. They transport all of our lab specimens and lab reports throughout the hospital. We have 2 who are patient escorts. Any family member, any patient, any visitor who comes to the hospital and doesn't know their way around, we have about 9 separate buildings. They are currently escorted by, we have 2 individuals with significant disabilities who escort every visitor. We have about 4 people who work in the cafeteria. We have 1 young woman who cleans and sterilizes every single isolette used by the hospital. We have, again, 3 people who work in sterilization, 1 who works in the dental sterilization lab. We have people who work in billing and accounts payable. We have folks who work in, gosh, there's so many, and I walk up, and materials management. We have quite a few people who work there doing stocking in a variety of departments. We do not have any enclaves. Even though we have a large number of people, they all work in separate departments and they report directly to those department managers. But we have folks in the emergency department, the operating room, the library, surgery, surgical administration, medical records, a very wide variety of jobs. If anyone is interested, not that I'm trying to plug our video, but we do have a 9-minute video which really gives a really clear picture of some of the jobs. And if you would email me, it's Erin, ERIN .RIEHLE @CHMCC.org. I would be happy to send you a free copy of that 9-minute video.
Hampshire, who's the State Director of Career and Technical Education, would like to know if the deferred graduation is a requirement of the Individual Disabilities for Education Act. She wasn't real familiar of deferred graduation, and she thinks it sounds like an interesting idea.
Help me, Joyce. No, it is not a requirement of IDEA, but what IDEA says is that kids can be in school until a certain age, whatever that state mandates. And again, Ohio says through the year of their 22nd birthday. And as we stated earlier, different states have different things. I don't know what New Hampshire is. But different states then have said that a way to keep students in school and still let them participate in graduation with their peers is a good practice because it helps keep students in school. And so as long as they have what they need to do to have graduation, which is a necessary credit, they can go through the ceremony, get their cap and gown, but stay in school. They just they cannot pick up their diploma. So is it part of IDEA? No. Am I correct, Joyce? But is it a good practice? Yes. Is there a way to do it legally? Yes. And you can make it work for you for both students, families, school districts, etc. Most school districts in Ohio have adopted some form of deferred or social graduation. It's not mandated, and we still strongly persuade schools to utilize this practice.
So they have the option to modify or waive graduation requirements for special needs students. Interesting twist.
Wow, we don't have that. They have to graduate.
Erin, could you give your website address one more time, just a little bit slower?
Sure, sorry. It's ERIN .RIEHLE @CHMCC.org. And if you email me, just ask for a copy of the videotape. We'd be happy to send that out.
I also think that the deferred graduation handout was one of the things that we sent here and is out on the web, so that anybody that wants those, that information is there. Finished? Okay. Thank you very, very much. This has been very exciting. We also want to let you know to join us for the next webcast, which is October 30th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at the Longaberger Alumni House. The presentation will also be webcast at www.nccte.org. The presentation is entitled, "How is Contextual Teaching and Learning Being Applied in the Career and Technical Education?" Susan Sears, Associate Professor, College of Education, The Ohio State University, is the presenter. Thank you.